Joel Goldsmith, one of the 20th century's most profound mystical teachers, discovered something remarkable about these words that has the power to completely transform how you approach every challenge in your life. Stay with me until the end, because understanding this principle could be the difference between struggling through life and experiencing a level of peace and fulfillment you've only dreamed possible. Have you ever wondered what would change in your life if you discovered that everything you're desperately praying for has already been given to you? What if the greatest spiritual secret of all time has been hiding in plain sight for over 2,000 years, misunderstood by millions, yet holding the key to transforming every area of your existence? Those three simple words Jesus spoke on the cross, "It is finished," are perhaps the most misunderstood spiritual revelation ever uttered. Has this ever happened to you? You hear a familiar biblical phrase repeated throughout your life, but one day it suddenly strikes you with completely new meaning. That's exactly what we're exploring today. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the globe. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Most people believe Jesus was simply announcing the end of his earthly journey, a surrender to death, a final breath before departing this world. But what if that interpretation completely misses the revolutionary truth he was actually revealing? What if, in that moment, Jesus wasn't declaring defeat, but was instead gifting humanity with the most powerful spiritual principle ever conceived? Imagine for a moment, what if every financial worry, health concern, relationship conflict, and personal struggle you're facing right now is already resolved in what Goldsmith calls the eternal now of spiritual reality? What if your prayers seem unanswered, not because God isn't listening, but because you're asking for something that already exists? This isn't about positive thinking or merely changing your attitude. What you're about to discover might surprise you. It's about recognizing a fundamental truth about the nature of reality itself. In spiritual consciousness, there is no healing needed because there is no actual disease. There is no abundance to manifest because infinite supply already exists. There is no relationship to fix because love is already whole and complete. Everything you think you need to achieve, acquire, or become has already been accomplished in divine reality. Your job isn't to create what you need, it's to recognize what already is. Now let's dive deeper into this revolutionary concept that has transformed countless lives. When we truly understand that it is done, we begin to see that our entire approach to prayer, manifestation, and spiritual growth has been backward. Instead of desperately working to create something new, we've been invited to recognize what already exists. This revelation completely transforms our approach to life's challenges. Think about this powerful analogy for a moment. Imagine standing knee-deep in a flowing river, desperately thirsty, begging and pleading for water. You're surrounded by exactly what you need, yet completely unaware of its presence. The water isn't absent, your recognition of it is. This perfectly illustrates the hidden truth behind "it is done." The very things we're praying for, visualizing, and struggling to manifest are already present in the divine reality that surrounds us. The transformation occurs not when something new appears, but when our perception shifts to recognize what was always there. This revelation creates a profound mindset shift that impacts every area of life. When financial challenges arise, most of us instinctively respond with anxiety and fear. We send desperate prayers skyward, begging for resources to appear, for doors to open, for miraculous provision. But through this new understanding, we can see how backward this approach truly is. If it is finished, then divine supply already exists in spiritual consciousness. The journey isn't about creating abundance through desperate manifestation techniques. It's about resting in the truth that abundance is already established as your spiritual birthright. This doesn't mean we sit passively while bills pile up, making no practical efforts. Rather, it means we take inspired action from an entirely different inner place. Consider the difference. When you make phone calls from a place of lack and desperation, your energy communicates scarcity. But when those same calls come from a consciousness of completeness, your decisions and words flow from wisdom rather than fear. The external actions might look similar to observers, but the consciousness behind them creates vastly different results. If these spiritual insights have touched something deep within you, hit that subscribe button to join our community of seekers. Together, we'll explore the profound truths that transform not just what we think, but how we experience life itself. I've witnessed this principle transform lives in remarkable ways. People facing financial ruin who shifted their inner approach, not by denying their circumstances, but by recognizing a deeper spiritual reality beneath the appearances, found pathways opening that were previously invisible. Opportunities appeared, solutions emerged, and resources manifested not because they created something new, but because they aligned with what was already there. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this understanding translates into practical healing experiences. The revelation of "it is done" isn't just philosophical. It has demonstrated extraordinary power in addressing physical and emotional suffering. If this perspective is beginning to shift something in your understanding, write "recognition, not creation" in the comments below. When we begin to grasp that spiritual wholeness isn't something to achieve, but something to recognize, we unlock the same healing power that Joel Goldsmith used to help thousands of people transform their physical and emotional conditions. His approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. When someone came to him with a diagnosis or illness, he didn't see a disease that needed healing. Instead, he perceived the finished spiritual perfection that was already true beneath the appearance of sickness. This wasn't denial or wishful thinking. It was a profound recognition of a deeper reality. What made Goldsmith's work so remarkable was that this recognition of completeness allowed the other person's consciousness to shift. Sometimes this happened dramatically in an instant. Other times, it unfolded gradually over weeks or months. But the transformation always came from the same source, recognizing what was already finished in divine reality, rather than fighting against what appeared to be true on the surface. This healing principle reveals a hidden truth about consciousness itself. Our experience of life doesn't come from external circumstances, but from our inner recognition. When we shift our perception from seeing brokenness to recognizing wholeness, our external world begins to reflect that inner journey. The body, relationships, and circumstances naturally align with our deepest recognition. The practical technique is deceptively simple, which is precisely why many people miss it entirely. When a problem appears in your life, whether physical symptoms, financial strain, or relationship conflict, your first response shouldn't be desperate prayer for change or immediate action. Instead, the most powerful first step is silence. Not an empty silence of resignation, but a filled silence of recognition. In this sacred space of quiet, you simply acknowledge, in spiritual reality, this is already finished. God's work is complete. What appears as a problem is only my limited perception of something already resolved in divine consciousness. You don't need to emotionally feel this truth at first. The revelations come through consistently acknowledging it mentally until your consciousness naturally shifts. This practice might take 5 minutes or 5 weeks. The timeline is irrelevant because in spiritual reality, time doesn't exist. What exists is the eternal, finished nature of divine creation, which includes your body, your relationships, and your supply. This mindset transformation isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about aligning your perception with what is already spiritually true. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what has already happened in consciousness, you align with divine reality. That alignment is what we call healing, prosperity, and harmony. But these aren't achievements. They're recognitions of the finished kingdom that was always present. I'd like to share with you some real-world examples of how this principle has transformed lives in seemingly impossible situations. If you've ever experienced a moment where your perception suddenly shifted and changed your entire reality, type, "I've experienced this shift" in the comments. When we examine these stories closely, we see a consistent pattern that anyone can apply, regardless of their circumstances. Consider Sarah, a single mother who found herself in what appeared to be an impossible financial situation. With 3 children depending on her, an eviction notice on her door, and only $70 in her bank account, her external reality painted a picture of complete lack. She had already tried everything the world recommends: desperate prayers, endless job applications, and outreach to every assistance program available. Nothing had changed. The turning point in Sarah's journey wasn't finding more resources. It was discovering this profound principle of recognition. At first, she was skeptical, even angry, at the suggestion that her crisis was already resolved when the eviction notice was painfully real. How could her supply be complete when her bank account clearly showed otherwise? This initial resistance is completely natural. It represents the journey we all face when shifting from surface appearances to deeper reality. For 2 weeks, Sarah practiced a different approach. Each morning, she sat in silence, acknowledging that in spiritual reality, her supply was already complete. She didn't immediately feel peaceful or see money appear, but gradually, her consciousness shifted from panic to a quiet certainty that transcended her circumstances. She still took practical action, still applied for jobs and made calls, but from an entirely different inner foundation. The revelation came in the 3rd week, when a former colleague called about a position she hadn't even applied for. The timing aligned perfectly, and the salary matched exactly what she needed. Was this mere coincidence? Sarah noticed something significant. The opportunity appeared only after her consciousness had shifted from desperately seeking to quietly knowing. The external provision matched her internal recognition that it was already finished. This same pattern appeared in Marcus's journey with chronic pain. For 8 years following a car accident, he had exhausted every avenue of relief. Multiple surgeries, medications, spiritual techniques, energy healing, and meditation retreats. Some approaches provided temporary relief, but the pain always returned, creating a cycle of hope and disappointment that became almost as debilitating as the pain itself. When Marcus encountered this principle of recognizing completion instead of seeking healing, his skepticism was matched only by his desperation. For 6 weeks he practiced resting in the truth that in divine reality his body was already perfect and whole. This wasn't about denying his pain or pretending it wasn't there. He acknowledged it as a limited perception of something already resolved spiritually while continuing his physical therapy and medical care. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or dramatic. Around week 7, he realized he'd gone 2 days without thinking about the pain. By week 12, the intensity had decreased by 60%. 6 months later, the chronic pain that had dominated his life for 8 years had disappeared completely. His doctors couldn't explain it medically, but Marcus understood. When his consciousness recognized the finished work, his physical experience gradually aligned with that recognition. These stories reveal something crucial about the relationship between consciousness and experience. Our external world doesn't create our consciousness. Our consciousness creates our experience. When we fundamentally shift how we perceive reality, reality itself begins to shift in response. This isn't mystical thinking. It's a practical principle that operates in every area of life. But what about relationships? Can this same principle transform connections that seem irreparably broken? The story of one couple's journey from the brink of divorce reveals something even more profound about the power of recognition. If one of these stories resonates with your own experience or current situation, comment, "This speaks to my journey" below. The power of recognition becomes even more profound when we examine what happened in Jennifer and Robert's marriage. After 19 years together, their relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce papers were being prepared. The resentment between them was so deep that communication had completely broken down. Both felt trapped in a cycle of hurt that seemed impossible to escape. What makes their story so illuminating is that the transformation began with just one person's shift in consciousness. When a friend gave Jennifer a book about recognizing spiritual wholeness in relationships, she began practicing this principle alone, without Robert's knowledge or participation. Every time anger arose toward her husband, she would pause and silently recognize, in spiritual truth, love is already complete between us. This isn't wishful thinking, this is recognition of divine reality. The remarkable aspect of this journey was that Jennifer wasn't trying to change Robert or fix their marriage through external means. She was simply shifting her own perception from seeing a broken relationship to recognizing the finished nature of love itself. For 3 weeks, nothing changed outwardly. Then Robert began noticing something different about Jennifer. Though he couldn't identify what had shifted, the atmosphere between them softened almost imperceptibly. Small openings appeared where actual conversations replaced bitter arguments. It took 7 months of Jennifer's consistent practice before Robert asked what had changed in her. They didn't experience an instant fairy tale reconciliation, but gradually rebuilt their connection on an entirely new foundation, recognizing spiritual completeness rather than trying to fix human brokenness. This revelation brings us to 3 essential practices that deepen our ability to recognize the finished kingdom in every area of life. The first is what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence. This means training yourself to acknowledge divine completeness in every moment, especially when problems appear. Not a God who will help you, but a presence whose perfect work is already established right where the problem seems to be. The second practice is resting in the Word. When you encounter a spiritual truth that resonates deeply, don't just acknowledge it intellectually and move on. Allow it to saturate your consciousness. If the statement, "It is finished," strikes you as profound, spend time sitting with those words, not analyzing them, not trying to make them work, just resting in their truth until they reveal deeper layers of meaning. The third practice is recognizing spiritual identity. Most problems exist because we identify as limited human beings who need things, lack things, and struggle with things. But in spiritual reality, our identity is already complete as the expression of divine consciousness. We're not humans trying to reach the divine. We're divine expressions mistakenly believing we're separate and limited. These 3 practices work together to create a fundamental shift in how we experience reality. They aren't techniques to manifest what we want, but rather pathways to recognize what already is. The practice of presence keeps us anchored in spiritual reality moment by moment. Resting in the Word allows truth to transform our understanding from within. Recognizing spiritual identity shifts our very sense of who we are. But this approach raises important questions. What happens when we face genuinely devastating circumstances? Is this merely spiritual bypass that ignores real problems? How do we reconcile this understanding with the undeniable challenges of human experience? If you've tried to practice spiritual principles during difficult times, type "the struggle is real" in the comments. Let's address the elephant in the room. The concern that recognizing it is finished in the midst of genuine crisis might just be spiritual bypass or toxic positivity. When you're facing overwhelming medical bills, when your body is racked with pain, or when your relationship is crumbling, acknowledging spiritual completeness can feel like denying reality. This resistance isn't just normal, it's actually a healthy sign that you're not settling for superficial spiritual platitudes. Goldsmith addressed this concern directly in his teaching. He emphasized that you're not denying the appearance or pretending problems don't exist on the human level. That would be spiritual bypass, and it doesn't lead to genuine transformation. Instead, you're recognizing that beneath the appearance is a spiritual reality that is already complete. Both levels exist simultaneously, the human appearance and the divine reality. The mistake most people make is trying to jump immediately from seeing a crisis to feeling complete peace about it. That's not how consciousness naturally shifts. The process begins with honest acknowledgement. Yes, the bank account is empty. Yes, the pain is real. Yes, the relationship is broken. Then underneath that acknowledgement, you begin recognizing, and yet in spiritual consciousness, this is already resolved. These seemingly contradictory truths coexist until your consciousness fully shifts. Even with this understanding, several implementation challenges typically arise. The first is impatience. Many people practice recognition for a few days, and when nothing changes externally, they conclude it doesn't work. This is where most abandon the teaching, often right before breakthrough would occur. Goldsmith was very clear about this reality. Consciousness shift takes time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, occasionally months, for deeply ingrained patterns. Consider this perspective. You've spent years, maybe decades, building a consciousness of lack, fear, and limitation. That consciousness didn't form overnight, and it won't dissolve overnight either. Every time you practice recognition of completion, you're dissolving old patterns and establishing new neural pathways. This gradual process resembles strengthening a muscle or learning a language more than a magical overnight transformation. Ready to discover more spiritual wisdom that actually transforms your daily experience? Subscribe now and become part of a journey where we explore the mystical truths hidden in plain sight throughout history. Another common challenge is what Goldsmith called taking back the problem. You practice recognition, feel peaceful, maybe even experience some improvement. Then something triggers the old fear pattern, and you immediately forget everything you've recognized. You're back in panic mode, desperately praying for help, completely forgetting that it is finished. This cycle creates enormous frustration. Goldsmith taught that this pattern is part of the process, not a sign of failure. Old consciousness patterns don't dissolve linearly. They release in layers. You might have genuine recognition of completion, then face a trigger that brings back old fear. This doesn't mean you've lost your progress, it means another layer is ready to be released. The practice isn't about never forgetting, it's about how consistently you return to recognition after forgetting. A third significant challenge is spiritual isolation. When you begin practicing this approach, you'll likely discover that everyone around you still operates from lack consciousness. Your family might think you're being irresponsible when you remain calm during crisis. Friends worry you're in denial. Even your logical mind questions if you're delusional. This external pressure can shake your deepest convictions. These challenges aren't evidence that the principle doesn't work. They're natural aspects of the journey from human perception to spiritual recognition. But what about truly catastrophic situations? How does this principle hold up when facing life-threatening illness or complete financial devastation? If you've experienced one of these challenges on your spiritual journey, Comment, "This resonates with my experience," below. Let's examine how this principle functions in the most extreme circumstances life can present. Michael's story provides a profound window into what's possible when spiritual recognition meets life's greatest challenge. After being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given just 3 months to live, Michael faced the ultimate test of everything he believed. As a devoted spiritual student who had meditated daily for years, his first response was feeling betrayed. Why hadn't his spiritual practice protected him from this devastating diagnosis? This reaction, this sense of betrayal, reveals something crucial about how many of us approach spirituality. We often practice as a form of insurance against suffering, as protection from life's hardest blows. But Michael's journey revealed a deeper truth. After 2 weeks of despair, he remembered Goldsmith's teaching on completion and realized that "it is finished" meant something entirely different than he'd understood. It meant that even within his diagnosis, spiritual perfection was already present. Not that the cancer wasn't real, but that underneath the appearance was unshakable, divine wholeness. What makes Michael's approach so illuminating is that he didn't choose between medicine and spiritual practice. He began recognizing spiritual completeness while still receiving full medical treatment. For 8 weeks, nothing changed externally. In fact, the cancer progressed, exactly as his doctors had predicted. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. His pain decreased slightly. His energy improved marginally. His doctors noted cautious optimism. Michael's story unfolded over 18 months of consistent recognition practice combined with medical care. The cancer went into remission, returned partially, then finally disappeared completely. His doctors called it unexplained spontaneous remission. But Michael understood the hidden truth behind his transformation. His consciousness had shifted from seeing himself as a person with cancer to recognizing his spiritual identity as the perfect expression of divine life. What's most remarkable isn't the physical healing, extraordinary as it was. It's how Michael lived during those 18 months of uncertainty. He maintained profound peace even when scan results were discouraging. He exhibited deep certainty even when symptoms temporarily worsened. His family witnessed someone facing potential death with inexplicable calm. This peace wasn't denial or resignation. It was the natural result of consciousness anchored in completion. Rebecca's journey through business catastrophe reveals another dimension of this principle. After investing everything into building a company with pure intentions, she faced bankruptcy that threatened to destroy her financially for years. The failure felt like cosmic punishment, raising the agonizing question, how could she have been so wrong? When Rebecca discovered Goldsmith's teaching on "it is finished," her initial reaction was anger. How dare someone suggest her crisis was already resolved when she was losing everything? But desperation makes us willing to try approaches we'd otherwise dismiss. She began practicing recognition not because she believed it, but because she had exhausted all other options. For the first month, nothing external changed. Her business continued declining. But internally, something subtle shifted. Rebecca found herself making clearer decisions from calm rather than panic. She negotiated better terms with creditors and identified which parts of the business to preserve and which to release. The revelation came when she realized that "it is finished" didn't mean her business would be saved as she wanted. It meant that in divine consciousness, her true purpose and supply were already established. And sometimes completion looks like endings, so new beginnings can emerge. 2 years later, Rebecca built a different business, aligned more authentically with her gifts. She came to understand that recognizing completion doesn't mean controlling outcomes according to your preferences. It means trusting that whatever unfolds is part of divine wisdom at work in your life. including through apparent failures. What's the difference between this spiritual maturity and merely accepting disappointment? The answer reveals how consciousness transformation actually works in our everyday lives. If you've ever experienced something you initially perceived as failure that later revealed itself as a doorway to something better, comment "divine redirection" below. The difference between spiritual maturity and merely accepting disappointment reveals the revolutionary nature of Goldsmith's teaching. When we first encounter spiritual principles, many of us approach them as sophisticated manifestation techniques, methods for getting what we want with less struggle. We read books promising that positive thinking or proper visualization will deliver our desired outcomes. This perspective represents the beginning stage of the spiritual journey. As we deepen in understanding, we discover that genuine spiritual maturity isn't about controlling circumstances to match our preferences. It's about recognizing divine wisdom already at work, even when, perhaps especially when, events unfold in ways we wouldn't choose. This represents a profound paradigm shift in how we approach life's challenges. Completion doesn't mean getting what you want. It means seeing perfection in what is, even in unwanted circumstances. This distinction separates magical thinking from authentic spiritual awakening. The beginner asks, "How can I use spiritual principles to fix my problems?" The mature practitioner asks, "How can I recognize the divine perfection already present within what appears as problems?" This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually through consistent practice and life experience. After months or years of recognizing completion, something profound happens in your consciousness. You stop dividing life into problems and solutions. You cease seeing yourself as someone who needs fixing or improving. You begin experiencing every moment, even difficult ones, as the continual unfolding of something already complete. This isn't a belief you hold intellectually, it's the consciousness you live from naturally. The practical transformation appears in unexpected ways throughout daily life. You notice you're not obsessively checking your bank balance anymore, not because you suddenly have unlimited wealth, but because your sense of security no longer depends on the numbers. You find yourself navigating difficult conversations without defensive reactions, not because you've mastered communication techniques, but because you're no longer protecting a vulnerable, incomplete self. Your physical well-being improves, you sleep better and have more energy. Not because you've discovered perfect health practices, but because anxiety isn't constantly depleting your system. Relationships deepen, even challenging ones, not because others change, but because you're approaching connections from completeness rather than need. These shifts happen gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize your entire relationship with life has fundamentally transformed. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was speaking directly to you across 2,000 years. He was revealing that the spiritual work is already complete. You don't need to become worthy through spiritual practices, achieve enlightenment through years of meditation, or earn divine love through perfect behavior. You already are the finished expression of divine perfection. Your only task is recognizing this truth consistently enough that your human experience naturally aligns with spiritual reality. This recognition transforms everything, not because it magically changes external circumstances, though it often does, but because it changes you at the most fundamental level. You become someone who lives from completion instead of lack, from certainty instead of fear, from knowing instead of seeking. This represents the greatest transformation possible in human consciousness. The question now becomes, how do we implement this understanding in daily life? What specific practices help us maintain this recognition when faced with life's inevitable challenges? And what happens during those times when we completely forget and find ourselves back in the old consciousness of lack and limitation. If you're beginning to sense the profound implications of living from completion rather than striving, comment "living from is finished" below. What we've explored together today isn't just spiritual theory, it's a practical approach to transforming how you experience every aspect of life. This principle of "it is done" that Jesus revealed and Joel Goldsmith rediscovered offers us a profound shift in consciousness that changes everything from the inside out. As you move forward from this moment, I invite you to experiment with this practice of recognition in your daily life. Start with something small, a minor irritation or concern, and practice recognizing the spiritual completeness already present. Notice how your experience shifts, not because circumstances magically change, but because your perception transforms. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. This community is filled with others walking the same path, discovering what it means to live from completion rather than striving. If this message resonated with you today, perhaps it found you at exactly the right moment. If so, simply comment, "This found me at the perfect time," below. I'd truly love to hear about your experiences as you begin implementing these principles. Your insights not only help me create content that serves you better, but they also inspire others who might be facing similar challenges. If you found value in today's exploration, consider subscribing to join us on this journey of spiritual discovery. Each like you leave helps these teachings reach others who might be searching for exactly this message. There's a video right here that delves deeper into how to maintain this consciousness of completion during life's most challenging moments. Click and continue with me there as we explore the practical application of these principles in everyday life. Until next time, remember, you don't need to become complete. You simply need to recognize the completion that already exists within you. That recognition changes everything.